Chapter 30 The seventh letter, Zain. He produced Zain, predominant in movement, crowned it, combined and formed it with Gemini in the universe, Sivan in the year, and the left foot of man, scepter Yetzirah. 24. The seventh letter, Zain, is one of the simple letters and is connected with the sign Gemini. Its radical meaning is a sword or weapon, while hieroglyphically it means an arrow, both the meanings suggesting the idea of conquest. Just as number 7 is the perfection of the first great step or period in man's cycle of unfoldment, so this letter indicates that the forces represented by the letters we have already studied have reached the end of the first arcana, the outbreathing of the first mother letter, air, and have laid down certain principles which are shown in action by the letter Zain. Zain represents man when he has reached a step where he can understand the underlying principles of life, and by the power of his perfected manhood grasp them in his hand as a weapon with which to carve his own destiny. Only so can he rule, for the meaning of Zain is also a scepter. At this step in his perfected manhood, man must become a conqueror, with the kingly ability to rule first himself, then all nature, and with the power to defend, preserve, and use the mystical weapon bestowed upon every victor, namely, the sword of the spirit, or the fiery sword of the magician. Thus Zain is the fulfillment or perfection of that which was breathed out by the mother Aleph, for the victory of number 7 is attained by a complete mastery of the breath. The words that are spoken must be words of love and words of healing. The victor who holds the sword or weapon Zain in his hand must have gained absolute control of his speech. For in one sense this weapon is the mighty weapon of the tongue, to which so many allusions are made in the Bible. In Psalms we read, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Again, who whet their tongue like a sword and shoot out their arrows, even bitter words. And again in Proverbs, there is that speaketh like the piercing of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health. Again, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Also at the great initiation we hear Job asking, is there iniquity in my tongue? Hence it is quite fitting that, as the manifestations of the first septenary may be called the children of the first mother, Aleph, air, they should be completed in the victory gained by a mastery of the tongue. As we have said elsewhere, speech is one of the greatest powers, for it includes the powers of sound, number, color, and, when written, form. To bring to your mind some of the practical effects of this power, we would ask you for one day to note carefully the effect your words have on those about you. Many pupils ask for something practical to do to develop occult powers and manifest the higher life. Noting the effect of your words is practical and most important, and a practice which can be indulged in without fear of dangerous consequences. And until at least some conception of the power of speaking kindly and lovingly, but to some purpose and some degree of mastery over it has been attained, the development of other occult powers will be retarded if not actually prevented. The relation of Zain to the sign Gemini is in the idea that Gemini rules the arms and represents also the masculine and feminine qualities combined. Only he who has raised his arms in blessing and has blended the masculine and feminine qualities within himself can be called the victor over the power of the tongue. Another aspect of Gemini is the two opposing forces to which man in his unregenerate state is bound, as St. Paul said, when I would do good, behold evil is present with me. Hence the victor must have found the perfect blending of these pairs of opposites and must know how to use them to help on his further advance, the ability to accomplish which is symbolized by the arms. When thou hast passed into the seventh, O happy one, thou shalt perceive no more the sacred three, for thou shalt have become that three thyself. In the tarot, the seventh card is called the Chariot, and is represented by a conqueror crowned with a coronet, composed of 3 pentagrams of gold. He stands in a chariot having the form of a cubic stone, having over him an azure canopy supported by 4 columns, and having 14 stars over his head. He has 3 right angles upon his breast, and upon his shoulders the Urim and Thummim, represented by 2 crescent moons, one on either side. He carries in his right hand a scepter surmounted by a globe, a square, and a triangle. In his left hand he has a fiery sword. Upon the square front of his chariot is a lingam and the winged sphere of the Egyptians, while 2 sphinxes, one black and one white, draw the chariot, each straining in an opposite direction, yet both looking toward the right and under the absolute control of the driver. This card symbolizes the main characteristics of the sacred septenary. It represents man who has become the conqueror, master both of himself and the elements, making the cube now become the philosopher's stone, his chariot. The heavens his canopy, the 2 sphinxes, the forces of the great agent, black and white magic, his servants to bear him onward. His cuirass is the breastplate of righteousness, or his knowledge of the manifestations of the divine, which makes him invulnerable to assaults from either the human or elemental kingdoms. The Urim and Thummim upon his shoulders indicate his priestly power to answer all questions through direct inspiration from the divine. The globe on the scepter, surmounted by the square and triangle, indicates the 7-fold powers of man arising from the scepter corresponds to the magic wand mentioned above, while the fiery sword is the sword of the Spirit with which he has gained the victory. The 7th commandment. 7. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Exodus 20:14. Since we know that number 7 is the number of perfection, especially that perfection of humanity which will prevail when, through the power of number 6, the 5 senses have evolved into the 7, we can readily understand that to commit adultery has a far greater significance than the one generally ascribed to it. For to adulterate is to add some foreign and inferior substance to the thing adulterated. Also, a thing is said to be adulterated when not absolutely pure and exactly what it purports to be. It has been the custom to confine this 7th commandment exclusively to the creative functions, but, while we concede the importance of obeying its literal meaning, still we must not make the mistake of confining it solely to that meaning. The fact that 7 is the number of perfection and yet deals with the creative powers of man is, to say the least, significant. A perfect humanity is one in which the creative powers have not been adulterated, but while fully functioning and under the absolute control of the will are used in love, purity, and wisdom to create that which is needful, unadulterated by lust or any of the lower carnal desires, and with a full recognition that the great creative force is creative on all planes, and that it becomes sex force only when it functions through the sex centers. And as we are responsible for the use of that great force through all the centers, it must be kept pure and unadulterated if we would conquer death and the grave. In itself, it is the mightiest agent entrusted to humanity. In fact, its use is the great test of the humanity of this globe. In its true esoteric significance, it is so far above man's present conception of it that only as he evolves the 6th and 7th senses can he understand and master all its possibilities. Mankind of today, in dense ignorance of its divine origin and purpose, is wallowing in the mire created by the perversion of its lowest aspect. Only when we know, really know, its true essence and functions, through our own divine illumination, and have tested and proven them from experience, in fact, only when we have been able to look this mighty problem in the face with a pure heart and an understanding mind and know it in its pure and unadulterated state, can we take the seventh step. We must create each step ere we can take it, and if we confine the great creative force to its functions in the flesh, we live in the flesh. And so long as we presume to judge the God who made us and gave us this force, and say that all use of the creative force is evil and belongs only to the unregenerate man, we must remain unregenerate, for we have turned our backs on the very power given us to bring about our regeneration and create our next step. Therefore, let us cease to adulterate our conceptions of this divine power with the misconceptions which have their origin in ignorance, asceticism, fear, prudery, and the self-righteous thought that we are better able to judge of what is pure than the God who made us, and use for their highest ends all the powers given us. Nor must we adulterate the divine wisdom handed down throughout the ages. Only thus can we truly obey the seventh commandment. Since we never try to kill anything that we do not consider harmful or vile, the very fact that the unenlightened place this mighty force at the head of all evil things and give it over to what they are pleased to term the devil, helps to make the devil an actual entity, built up through the ages by man's perverted thought forces, and vivified and strengthened daily by the votive offerings of those who create him out of the very forces which should make man a god. Is it any wonder, then, that the devil lives and thrives and exerts a vile, degenerating and disintegrating influence upon mankind? For every outpouring of life force which the unenlightened mind of man brands as vile, goes to prolong the life and strengthen the powers of the devil and his angels. For the thought of evil creates evil thought forms, hence that power given to man with which to reach divinity, which should bring him to number 7 and make him perfect even as his Father in heaven is perfect, has been adulterated and used to bring about imperfection and death. Therefore, until we learn the real essence of this seventh commandment by heart and exemplify it in thought and life, the angel with the flaming sword will forever bar us from returning to our spiritual home in the Garden of Eden.